Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about color temperature and white balance. So, color temperature, what is it? Color temperature means that all light has a temperature, or how warm or yellowish it looks, or how cool or blue it looks. And some artificial lights have tints as well. So, something important to know is that color temperature is measured in what's called kelvins, or K. And that's important to know because you're going to hear people talking about, oh, my white balance is set at 3800K or 5000K or 7800K. So that's what they're talking about. When you hear that K at the end, they're talking about the white balance. So let's look at this chart real quick. Okay. And some of this is a little obvious, right? So over here we have match, flame, candlelight. We know that that's a really orange looking color. And then over here we have blue sky, twilight, night. So, when the sun has gone down and you're getting that dusk time, everything kind of looks bluish, or the blue hour. Those ones are kind of obvious, but there's also a whole range right in between. And our eyes sometimes don't actually pick this up until we start really looking and paying attention to these things and kind of train our eyes to see the differences in the color of lights. We have like household tungsten. So if you're ever taking a photo in your house and you're like, man, why do my photos inside always look so orangey? It's because the light is orangey, okay? Our eyes do a really good job of taking in that information and then kind of color correcting in our brains, and for the most part. Now, I don't know if any of you guys remember, but there's been a couple controversies when it comes to photos and colors. So a big one was this shoe here. So this shoe had been posted online and people were confused. And I'm not completely sure about this. I thought it was a completely just like a white balance thing, but it's also a brain thing, because I've looked at this photo side by side, looking at the exact same photo with people, and we've both seen different things. So when I see this photo, my brain recognizes it as being pink and white. But I mean, I know it's not this pink. I know that, my brain is doing some work to tell me that, okay, there's probably a bluish cast in the photo, and it's actually, in real life, it looks like this. So here we have an example of someone who color corrected it, which is what you're going to be learning how to do. Color corrected so that, we know these laces are white, and so you add more either green or yellow, blue or yellow, or green or magenta, in order to get that white to actually look white, and then it corrects all the colors along with it. So yeah, really interesting examples. Same thing with this. This is a gift someone made. So this is what the dress actually looks like color corrected. It's that dark blue and black, but the photo that was posted was this right here. And some people see the original photo as being gold and white. And I know, like, my brain sees the original photo and I'm seeing that it's kind of washed out, that there was a yellow lighting happening, and so that is why it looks like it does. Like I said, our brains work really well to do that, but I think some people's brains work differently. So yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to maybe do some kind of experiment. Okay, so getting back to this, enough with the internets. Now, this is something that artists have been looking at and working with for a really long time. So even before photography, now I think these paintings I'm about to show you were done when photography had been invented already, but we really didn't have color photography yet. But Monet's Haystack series is a perfect example. So let me show you that real quick. And some people would be like, why the heck would you ever paint haystacks? Well, what he was doing was actually looking at color temperature and seeing how it's actually changing what objects look like. So he knows that hay is this yellow, but when it comes to the type of lighting and how it's hitting the hay and the weather conditions, it's going to change what it actually looks like, the colors that are there. And so he was really paying attention to this and representing it in different ways. So what a difference here from a sunny day to a snowy day. This is one where it's backlit. This one was backlit too, you can tell because of the shadow there. And this one's backlit but way more saturated. So this one's backlit in the sun, so sunny day, probably summer day. This one's a winter day. Yeah, and he did, I think it's something like 25 of these paintings. So if you want, you can, there's the Google search link where I was just at if you guys want to look at it. It's really interesting. I haven't done this with, one setting with photography yet, but I think I might have to set up an experiment. Anyways, moving forward. So that's color temperature. And again, color temperature is when we're talking about the actual light. Now, white balance is when we're talking about the settings in our camera or the settings that we use in post-processing or editing to correct the color changes. Okay, so there are presets built into your camera to match different lighting conditions. Let me move this down. So some common presets are automatic. And for these projects, that's what I've been shooting in. I'm figuring that's where you guys are probably shooting in. You haven't probably played with your white balance settings yet. And to be honest, auto does a pretty darn good job most of the time, at least in mirrorless and DSLR cameras. So, it's kind of up to you on whether you want to shoot in these other white balance settings. I'll tell you, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'm telling you, it is most helpful if you're shooting in JPEG instead of RAW, because it's more difficult to correct white balance on a JPEG file versus a RAW file. Now, we haven't actually talked about what the differences are. We're actually going to be talking about that more in depth in a couple weeks. But just know that for now, you're gonna, and once we talk about this a little bit more, you'll probably think back like, oh, okay, now it makes more sense. But just for now, know that if you primarily shoot in JPEG, it's going to be more difficult to fix your white balance than when you're shooting in RAW. So it becomes even more important to really dial in your white balance settings. So back up here, some of the presets are auto, daylight. So, if we're out in the day, it's usually setting it to around 5000K, maybe a little bit warmer depending on the time of day. Shade is usually a little bit cooler. So if the light is a little bit bluer because you're in the shade, then your camera with this preset is going to add a little bit of yellow to counterbalance that blue and bring it more to the middle, which is 5000K. 5000K, 5500K, different people use different baseline settings, but it's around there. Between 5 and 5500K, 5000 and 5500K is white light, and that's usually when you're color correcting what you're trying to get your photo to. So if you have too much yellow coming in, you add some blue. If you have too much green coming in, you add magenta, and vice versa. If it's too blue, you add yellow. If it's too magenta, you add green. Okay, so let's see. Now, some cameras do have an option to create custom presets, and this can be super helpful, especially when you have mixed lighting situations. Let's say you're shooting indoors and you have light coming in that's kind of yellowy, but at the same time you have a window nearby that's throwing in some more bluish light from outdoors. Then if they're both hitting your subject, then you can create a custom white balance setting in your camera to get better photos. So something to know, not all cameras have this, and how they work are kind of different. Some of them have little graphs that you move around. Some of them have you take a photo of like a neutral area. It's a little bit more advanced, but I just want to let you guys know that that option is there. Okay, so Now, when we're color correcting an image, like I said, we're trying to get to that balanced white area. So, balanced would be around this area, this 5500 or 5000 K area, where the light just looks white. We're not seeing a noticeable yellow or blue or green or magenta coloring on our subject. But, as with all things, you can use white balance creatively to convey a mood or an emotion, right? So let's say that if you want something to feel a little bit more happy, you probably want your white balance to be set a little bit more yellowish. Yellowish is usually feels happier, sunny, so it's also can sometimes, when you get really, really yellow, it can feel very nostalgic, like an old photo. And I think that's also because we're used to seeing old photos faded, and they usually fade to either a yellowy or a magenta-y color. And so when we use yellow or magenta, sometimes it gives a photo kind of a nostalgic or old feeling to it. Now, let's say you wanted to use blue. Blue has an overall calming effect. So if you're taking a photo of like the ocean, a slightly bluer cast would actually add to that calmness of looking out at the ocean. But if you also underexpose your image and have that bluer white balance, it's actually going to give it kind of a gloomy or sad type of feeling. Now, none of these are wrong or right. It just really comes down to what you are trying to communicate with your images. You could take a portrait of someone and change the white balance and change the communication. So it's really interesting. Color theory is a whole degree on its own. But we're just going to touch on it really quickly. Now, a green tint can make people look sickly. So it makes skin tones look sickly. And it can also create an uneasy feeling. So if you're not shooting a person, you often will find that, it'll create this weird, uneasy, like something's just not right feeling. One of my favorite examples of this is in one of the Joker movies, the one with Heath Ledger. When he's in the hospital, they put a green tint on everything. And it's a hospital, it's supposed to be white and bright. But by adding that green tint, they're letting us, the audience, know that there's something that's not right happening right here. This person is, insane. There's something wrong with them. So it's very readily used all of the time. Another example is, if any of you guys remember the Matrix movies, they put green on almost every scene when they're in the Matrix. And that's just, to let you know, to communicate that there's something not right with what's going on right now in this world, in this Matrix world. So it's a really interesting use. Now, magenta can make skin tones feel rosier. Makes sense, right? So sometimes for portraits, I'll add just a touch of magenta to kind of make the skin tones pop a little bit more. Okay, so this is the basics of white balance. We're going to be doing an activity where we play with white balance a bit in Lightroom. But really interesting stuff. It could really, change up the mood of a photo dramatically. Now, after you're done watching this video, I want you guys to go ahead and watch this video. This is such a great one. He actually has these different lights set up at different color temperatures and then takes photos, it's a video, but changes the white balance on his camera so you can see how the white balance is actually affecting how the color temperatures look. So watch the video.